A while ago I found out that one of my coworkers knew my boyfriend from school. It came up casually. We were in the break room and someone mentioned where they studied, and my coworker laughed and said he knew my boyfriend very well. He's one of those people everyone at work likes. Always helpful, remembers birthdays, and jumps in when things get messy. So I brought it up to my boyfriend that evening, expecting maybe a funny story or at worst some mild awkwardness. Instead, he shut down almost immediately. He told me that this coworker, along with his group of friends, made his life unbearable in school. He didn't go into detail at first, but when I pushed a bit, he said enough that it painted a pretty intense picture. Being singled out, being mocked constantly, and things escalating over time. Some of what he implied didn't even sound like something a school would ignore for that long. I kept thinking about my own experience. If someone even said something mildly offensive, teachers stepped in. There were consequences. So part of me struggled to fully understand how it could have gone on like that without intervention. But I didn't say that directly to him. I told him I was sorry that happened and left it there. Still, I couldn't reconcile the two versions of this person. At work, this guy is patient, considerate, and almost overly careful with people. He checks in if someone seems off. He goes out of his way to make new hires feel comfortable. It's hard to picture that same person being part of something as bad as what my boyfriend described. After a few days of thinking about it, I suggested maybe it would be good for them to clear the air. Not in a confrontational way, just a casual setting. We're all adults now. People change. It seemed like an opportunity to put something old to rest instead of carrying it forever. At first, my boyfriend didn't react strongly. He said he'd think about it. Later that week, I was planning some after-work drinks anyway. Nothing big, just a mix of work friends and a couple of my own friends. I told him he could come, and he said he probably would. I mentioned that my coworker would be there. He immediately said he wasn't coming. Not just that, he sent me a string of messages that honestly surprised me. Angry, dismissive, and a few comments directed at me that felt unnecessary. He said I was ignoring what he told me, that I was choosing sides, and that I clearly didn't take him seriously. It escalated quickly from what I thought was a simple social thing into something much bigger in his mind. I told him it wasn't about choosing sides. I just thought maybe things had changed. We're all in our mid to late 30s now. School was almost 2 decades ago. People aren't frozen in time. Someone who was awful at 16 isn't automatically awful at 35. He didn't want to hear it. He said I didn't understand what he went through, and that putting him in the same room as that person wasn't neutral. It was disrespectful. I tried to explain that I wasn't forcing anything, just offering a chance for closure if he wanted it. But by then, he was already done with the conversation. He didn't come that night. The drinks went ahead as planned. My coworker was there, same as always, easygoing, talking to everyone, even helping clean up when people started leaving. At one point, someone made a joke about school days, and he casually admitted he wasn't the nicest person back then, and that he regrets a lot of it. It wasn't directed at me, and he didn't bring up my boyfriend specifically, but it stood out. It made me think even more that people do change. After that night, things between me and my boyfriend have been tense. He hasn't brought it up again directly, but there's this underlying frustration whenever the topic of work or that coworker comes up. He's shorter with me, less open. I didn't do anything unreasonable. I didn't invite them to sit down and rehash the past. I didn't ambush him. I told him clearly who would be there. He agreed initially, then changed his mind, which is fine. But the way he reacted, especially the messages, felt disproportionate. At the same time, I do understand that I didn't live what he lived. If his experience was as bad as he says, then of course he wouldn't want anything to do with someone connected to it. I get that. Where I'm stuck is this. I don't think it's healthy to carry that level of anger forever, especially towards someone who may not even be that person anymore. And it puts me in a strange position, because this coworker is part of my daily life. I can't just pretend he doesn't exist. I'm not asking my boyfriend to be friends with him. I'm not even asking him to forgive him. I just thought that maybe, after all this time, there could be some level of acknowledgement that people grow and change. Instead, it feels like I've crossed a line I didn't realize was there. Now I'm questioning whether I pushed something I shouldn't have, or if he's holding on to something that's controlling more of his present than it should. People shared their opinions. One said, "You are so deep in your own comfort that you rewrote your boyfriend's trauma into a personality flaw. Read your own post back slowly. He told you this guy made his life unbearable, reacted strongly the second you suggested contact, then outright refused to be around him. And your takeaway was basically, but my coworker is nice to me and brings good vibes to the office, so maybe my boyfriend needs to grow up." That is an insane way to process what someone you supposedly care about told you. Also, your little comparison to your own school is ridiculous. At my school, that wouldn't have happened means absolutely nothing. Schools ignore abuse all the time. Teachers miss things. Administrators protect popular kids. Groups cover for each other. You not being able to imagine it does not make it fake, exaggerated, or hard to swallow. It just means you were lucky enough not to live it. And the most revealing part is that you didn't just privately doubt him. You acted on those doubts. You decided you, the person who wasn't there, were the best judge of whether he should get closure. That wasn't for him. That was for you. You wanted your neat little worldview preserved. Nice coworker, mature adults, old stuff in the past. Your boyfriend's pain was inconvenient because it complicated your office dynamic, so you tried to stage manage a resolution. Then when he panicked and lashed out, you called him childish. No, what was childish was playing trauma referee because you liked the bully better. You keep saying, people change, but you haven't shown 1 ounce of concern for whether your boyfriend changed into someone who learned to protect himself. He did. He saw a threat and he pulled back. Good for him, because clearly no one else in the situation was going to protect him. You're not neutral. You're not mature. You're one of those people who thinks abuse stops counting the moment the abuser becomes pleasant company for strangers. Another one said, you say you're stuck because your coworker is part of your daily life, but your boyfriend is stuck with memories he didn't choose. One is inconvenience. The other is damage. You didn't just suggest closure. You tried to schedule it like a team-building exercise. That's not how this works. Closure is something the hurt person decides, not something their partner arranges over drinks because it would make things feel neater. Also, your coworker admitting he wasn't the nicest is not the redemption arc you think it is. That's vague, safe language. It doesn't acknowledge harm. It doesn't take responsibility. It just smooths things over socially. You grabbed onto that because it fits your narrative. Right now, you're acting like a mediator when nobody asked you to be one. And worse, you're siding with the version of events that keeps your life easiest. Another person said, you're not being logical here, you're being selective. You accepted your coworker's present-day behavior as proof he's changed, but you treated your boyfriend's past experience like it needs verification. That imbalance is the issue. One person gets the benefit of the doubt automatically, the other has to justify why he's still affected. And calling his reaction childish is wild. Avoiding someone who hurt you isn't immature, it's self-preservation. What's actually immature is thinking adulthood means forcing uncomfortable interactions just to prove you're over something. You keep framing this as letting go, but it sounds more like you want him to stop making things inconvenient for you. Follow-up. I didn't expect the response I got last time. I thought people would at least try to see both sides, but instead it turned into everyone acting like I'm some kind of arsehole for not blindly accepting everything my boyfriend said. I've read through it all, and honestly, it just feels like people want a clear good guy and bad guy, and I don't think it's that simple. A lot has happened since then. After that night where he refused to come to drinks and sent those messages, things didn't go back to normal. He didn't apologize for what he said to me, and I didn't apologize either because I don't think I did anything wrong. We just sort of moved around each other. Conversations became short and practical, nothing deeper. At work, things carried on as usual. My coworker, let's call him R, was the same as always, helpful and relaxed, the kind of person who makes the day easier. But I kept thinking about everything. It didn't sit right with me that I was supposed to just accept that someone like that had done things as extreme as what my boyfriend described, without even questioning it. So I did what people here told me not to do. I spoke to R. It wasn't some dramatic confrontation. We were already talking one afternoon, and I brought it up carefully. I told him I'd found out he knew my boyfriend from school. He paused for a second, clearly thinking, and then said, yeah, he remembered him. I asked him directly if there had been issues back then. He didn't deny that he wasn't great as a teenager. He said he was part of a group that teased people, that they were immature, and that they probably crossed lines sometimes. But he also said it wasn't anything like what people now would call serious bullying. No physical stuff, nothing ongoing for years. More like typical school behavior that people exaggerate later. He didn't seem defensive. If anything, he seemed a bit embarrassed about it, but not in a way that suggested something extreme had happened. He even said, if he feels like I hurt him, I'd apologize, but I don't remember it being that bad. That honestly matched more with what I could believe. After that conversation, I felt more certain that my boyfriend's version is, at the very least, amplified. Maybe he experienced it strongly. Maybe he internalized it differently, but I don't think it was what he made it sound like. I told my boyfriend that I'd spoken to R. That conversation went badly. He immediately got angry again, asking why I would go behind his back and talk to someone he clearly wanted nothing to do with. I told him I didn't go behind his back. I'm allowed to talk to people I work with, and this directly affects me too. I told him what R said, that he admitted to being immature but didn't remember anything extreme. He said, of course R would downplay it and that people like that never admit what they actually did. But that's exactly my problem. There's no version of reality where my boyfriend is open to reconsidering anything. If R denies it, he's lying. If R apologizes, it's fake. If R has changed, it doesn't matter. There's no room for anything except my boyfriend being completely right. I told him that. I said I'm not saying nothing happened, but I don't believe it was as severe as he's making it out to be, especially when the other person involved doesn't even recognize it that way. I said holding on to that level of anger decades later isn't healthy. He took that as me calling him a liar. Since then, things have shifted more. I haven't stopped interacting with R at work. I'm not going to. In fact, I've probably interacted with him more, not intentionally, but because we're on the same projects and he's easy to work with. We've had conversations about growing up, about how people change, about how stupid people can be as teenagers. Nothing directly about my boyfriend again, but enough that I feel like I understand him as a person. And I don't see someone who would have done what my boyfriend describes. At home, my boyfriend has become more withdrawn. He doesn't ask about my day anymore. If I mention work, he shuts down. He's refused to come to 2 more social things where R would be present, even though they were group settings, not anything focused on him. At some point, I got tired of it. We had another argument a few days ago, and I said something I've been thinking for a while. I told him that I'm not going to damage my work relationships or avoid someone entirely because of something that happened when he was a kid, especially when there's no clear agreement on what actually happened. He said I was choosing R over him. I said no, I'm choosing reality over a version of events that doesn't add up. That didn't go well. He asked me if I even believed him at all. I told him I believe he felt hurt, but that doesn't automatically mean everything happened the way he remembers it. People reinterpret things over time. That's just how memory works. He hasn't really spoken properly to me since. At this point, I'm starting to see this less as a specific issue about one person and more as a bigger compatibility problem. I don't think it's reasonable to expect your partner to cut off normal parts of their life because of something like this. I also don't think it's healthy to carry something from school into your late 30s to this extent. I'm not saying he should be friends with R. I'm not even saying he should ever be in the same room as him. But expecting me to act like R doesn't exist, or to treat him as some kind of terrible person when that's not what I see every day, is not something I'm willing to do. And yes, I know people are going to say I'm dismissing his trauma again. That's exactly what everyone said before. But at some point, there has to be a line between acknowledging someone's feelings and letting those feelings dictate everything around them. I'm not willing to cross that line. If that makes me the bad person here, then I don't really know what else I'm supposed to do. Opinions one said, people are attacking you. Girl, what they're actually doing is reacting to the fact that you sound disturbingly comfortable siding with the person who made your partner miserable because he's convenient to you. The part that really stands out is you talking to R like you were conducting some fair investigation. That was never neutral. Of course, R downplayed it. People almost never describe their own cruelty accurately, especially when they've had 20 years to clean it up into, we were all immature and it was just teasing. That is the oldest script in the book. And you swallowed it because it was the version you wanted. It preserved your work friendship, your image of him, and your belief that your boyfriend is overreacting. And your boyfriend knows that. That's why this is probably dead already, even if he hasn't formally ended it yet. The issue is no longer school. The issue is that when he trusted you with a painful part of himself, you cross-examined it, outsourced it to the guy he said harmed him, then came back home and basically told him his memory is unreliable. That's such an ugly betrayal. Also, you are way too impressed by R being easy to work with. Bullies grow up, some get polished, some become socially skilled, some learn exactly how to seem safe. That doesn't erase the damage. And honestly, even if R had changed into a saint, your boyfriend still wouldn't owe him forgiveness, access, or a ducking review panel on whether the abuse counts. R sounds like a guy who knows how to launder his past into harmless nostalgia. Your boyfriend sounds like someone who learned the hard way that people will only believe pain if it's dramatic enough for them. And you sound like the kind of partner who can make cruelty sound reasonable as long as it arrives in a calm voice and a nice office shirt. Another said, I actually think the most revealing thing here is that you don't seem cruel in a loud way. You seem cruel in an administrative way, the tidied up, reasonable, let's be fair way. The kind that does the most damage because it never has to admit it's doing damage. You didn't scream at your boyfriend. You didn't mock him outright. You did something worse. You translated his pain into a dispute. You turned a confession into a fact-checking exercise. You elevated the bully into a credible witness against the victim because he now helps people with spreadsheets and says the right humble little phrases about growth. That is bleak as hell. I also don't think you understand why your boyfriend is withdrawing. You keep framing it like he can't move on from childhood. I think he has moved on from the original bully as much as he can. What he's reacting to now is you. Specifically, the realization that the person in his bed is more disturbed by unresolved social awkwardness than by the possibility that he suffered and wasn't believed. That is a relationship killer. R's role here is almost secondary now. Sure, he sounds slippery. If he feels hurt, I'd apologize, is classic non-apology garbage. It avoids ownership while sounding decent. But the bigger story is you hearing that and thinking, yes, this sounds trustworthy. That tells me your threshold for believing harm is incredibly high, but your threshold for excusing it is laughably low. Your boyfriend is probably reevaluating every vulnerable conversation he's ever had with you, because once someone shows they'll submit your pain for outside review, you can't unknow that. You don't just lack empathy here, you have the kind of confidence that makes empathy impossible. And that's way more toxic than the blunt arseholes, because at least they don't pretend they're being balanced while they stab you. Follow-up. I didn't plan on updating again, but things have shifted in a way that I think actually clarifies where I stand, even if people are just going to say the same things again. After my last post, I didn't take any of the advice because, honestly, most of it wasn't advice. It was people deciding I'm a bad person and working backwards from that. None of that helps me figure out what to actually do in my real life. What I did do was try to resolve this in a practical way. I spoke to R again at work, but this time more directly. I told him that my boyfriend clearly feels strongly about what happened, and that whether or not he remembers it the same way, there's obviously some level of hurt there. I asked him if he'd be willing to acknowledge that in a more direct way, not vague if I hurt you language, but something that actually addresses it. He was hesitant at first, but he didn't refuse. He said he didn't want to make things worse or insert himself where he's not wanted, but if it would help, he'd send a message. I thought that was a reasonable step forward, so I gave him my boyfriend's number. I didn't ask first. I already know people are going to focus on that, but I didn't see the point in dragging this out further. My boyfriend refuses to engage, so at some point something has to move. R sent him a message. I saw it before he sent it. It wasn't dismissive. He said he was sorry for how he acted back then, that he knows he wasn't kind, and that if he contributed to making school difficult, he regrets it. He didn't go into specifics because he said he genuinely doesn't remember details, but it wasn't flippant. My boyfriend didn't respond. Instead, he came to me later, furious. Not just upset, angry in a way I haven't really seen before. He asked why I would give his number to someone he's explicitly avoided. I told him because he won't take any step towards resolving this, and I'm not going to let something from years ago keep affecting things now. That's when he said I crossed a line. I told him I didn't see it that way. I see it as trying to close something that he refuses to even look at. The conversation turned into another argument, and this time I didn't hold back. I told him that at some point, if something was truly that serious, there would have been some kind of escalation back then. Schools don't just let things go on for years without intervention. If it were physical, if it were constant, something would have been done. There would be records, complaints, something. He said that's not how it works, that a lot of things go unnoticed or ignored. But again, that puts me in a position where I'm supposed to just accept the most extreme version of events with no context, no confirmation, nothing. I told him that from everything I've seen and heard, this sounds more like something that's been built up over time in his memory, rather than something that was objectively that severe. That's when he said, I don't believe him at all. I corrected him. I said I believe he felt that way. But feelings and facts aren't always the same, especially after years. Memory isn't perfect. People reshape things, especially emotional experiences. That didn't help. At one point, I said something I probably would have avoided before, but I don't think it's wrong. I said that people who go through genuinely severe ongoing bullying don't usually handle it like this decades later. They either confront it, process it, or distance themselves without letting it control their present to this extent. He took that as me saying he wasn't a real victim. That's not what I said, but I understand why he heard it that way. Still, I'm not going to pretend I don't see a difference. Since then, things between us have changed more clearly. He barely engages with me unless necessary. There's no interest in resolving anything anymore on his side. It's just distance. Meanwhile, at work, things have continued normally. If anything, I've got to know R better in the process. Not because I'm trying to replace anything, but because we're working together more closely on a project. We've had conversations about growing up, about how people act in groups when they're younger, and about how people sometimes don't even realize the impacts they have. He's been open about the fact that he wasn't a great person in school, but he also doesn't recognize the version of events my boyfriend describes. That consistency matters to me. I'm not saying R is perfect. I'm not saying nothing happened. But there's a gap between I was a bit of an arsehole as a teenager, and I made someone's life unbearable for years, and I don't think it's unreasonable to question where the truth actually lies. At this point, I've stopped trying to accommodate both sides equally. I told my boyfriend recently that I'm not going to change how I interact at work. I'm not going to avoid someone I see every day, and I'm not going to treat R like some kind of low life when that's not who he is now and, from what I can tell, not who he remembers being even then. He said that tells him everything he needs to know. I said it probably does. I also told him that this isn't just about R anymore. It's about how we handle conflict in reality. I don't think it's healthy to build your present around something from your past without any willingness to re-examine it. He thinks I'm invalidating him. I think he's refusing to engage with anything that challenges his version. I even pointed out that if this was truly as severe as he claims, there would be some external confirmation. Someone else who remembers it that way, some kind of consequence at the time. But everything I've looked into, everything I've heard indirectly, suggests it wasn't seen that way by others. He said that just means no one cared. Maybe. Or maybe it wasn't what he thinks it was. At this point, I'm not going to keep going in circles. I'm not cutting off my coworker. I'm not pretending I believe something I don't fully believe. And I'm not going to keep apologizing for trying to deal with this in a way that actually moves things forward. If he can't move past it, then maybe that says more about where he is than anything else. Follow-up. It's been a long time since I wrote anything about this, and I'm not even sure why I am now. I guess because everything that felt so certain back then has completely fallen apart, and I don't really have a version of events that makes me look good anymore. My relationship with my boyfriend didn't end in one big argument. It ended quietly. After that last fight, he stopped trying to explain himself, and I stopped trying to convince him. We lived like that for a few weeks. Same space, separate routines, no real conversations. It felt like we were already broken up, just without saying it out loud. One evening, he told me he was done, just said he didn't trust me anymore and didn't see a way back from that. He packed what he needed and left that weekend. I didn't stop him. At the time, I still thought he was overreacting, and that he'd come around once things settled. He didn't. After he left, I lent more into work. It was easier. When R was there, things felt normal, uncomplicated. He didn't treat me like I'd done something wrong. If anything, he seemed to understand my side of things. We talked more and had lunch together more often, and it gradually shifted into something else. I didn't frame it as replacing my boyfriend. I told myself it just happened naturally. We already got along, we already spent time together, and there wasn't the same tension or resistance. It felt like being with someone who actually saw things the way I did. A couple of months after my breakup, we started seeing each other properly. At first, it felt like confirmation that I had been right all along. He was kind, attentive, and easy to be around. There was no conflict, no heavy conversations about the past, no emotional landmines. It felt simple in a way my previous relationship hadn't. I ignored the overlap. I ignored how quickly everything moved. I ignored the fact that I had gone from defending him at work to dating him. Eventually, I left my job. That decision wasn't forced, but it wasn't entirely independent either. People at work had started to notice. There were comments, subtle things at first and then less subtle. It became clear that staying there while being in a relationship with him was going to come with its own complications. I told myself I was choosing something more important, a relationship over a job. I found another position, less convenient and less stable, but I convinced myself it was worth it. For a while, it seemed like it was. Then things started to shift in a way I didn't expect. The version of him I saw at work wasn't the full version. Outside of that environment, he was different. Not in an obvious, dramatic way, but in small, consistent ways that added up. Less patient, more dismissive. Conversations that used to feel easy started feeling one-sided. He wasn't unkind, but he wasn't as considerate as I had believed. At first, I thought it was just adjustment. Different setting, different dynamics. Then I started noticing something else. He talked about the past differently when it came up indirectly, not just about my boyfriend, but about other people. Stories that sounded like we just messed around, but with details that, if you looked closely, weren't as harmless as he framed them. It wasn't an admission. It was more like a pattern minimizing things, turning them into jokes, brushing them off. It made me uncomfortable in a way I couldn't ignore. I brought it up once, carefully. I asked if he thought he had ever gone too far with people back then. He gave the same kind of answer he had given before, that they were all immature, that people take things too seriously later, that everyone exaggerates. This time, it didn't reassure me. It felt familiar. Our relationship didn't collapse immediately. It stretched out, small arguments, growing distance, and less effort from both sides. I think by that point neither of us was as invested as we had been at the start. He ended it. He said we weren't compatible long-term, that things felt off, that it wasn't working the way it should. I didn't fight it. I didn't have anything solid to argue with. After that, things got quiet in a different way. I had already left my previous job. The new one wasn't great. I didn't have the same connections, the same comfort. My routine was different, smaller. I didn't have the relationship I thought I had chosen, and I didn't have the one I walked away from either. At some point, I heard through mutual contacts that my ex is doing well. He's in a new relationship. Apparently it's serious. I don't know details, but I've seen enough to know he's not stuck the way I said he was. That part is hard to process, not because I expected him to be miserable, but because I was so certain that I was the one being reasonable, that I was the one seeing things clearly. I thought he was the one